Hey folks, what's up? This is actually a very special issue for myself. I'm so excited to be part of this right here. I actually have, I'll let him introduce himself, but actually we've already made history actually at a previous presidential debate and forum that we ran earlier. So that was pretty cool. So go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience.
My name is Emanuel Pastreich. I'm an independent candidate for president, and I ran in the Green Party for a month. Cornel West and I were the two candidates, and we both had to drop out. I also spent most of my life as an Asia expert. I worked in Korean, Japanese, and Chinese literature, and I lived in Korea for 12 years. I taught at Kyunghee University for 8 of those years. And I, of course, wrote for Chosunilbo, Chunilbo, and a lot of other newspapers. And I published 7 books in Korean. So Korea is extremely important to me. And I'm looking forward to talking with DJ Elf about what's happening in Korea today and what it means for Americans, for Korean Americans, and for all of us.
I really appreciate that so much. To tell you the truth, I've never been to Korea myself. I've always wondered what it was like.
We'll have to go.
You know, actually, I heard that I feel like here, like in the United States, that kind of like culture stops in a way, right? Like the Koreans come over here from Korea, they're not really interacting with Korea that much anymore. So the pop culture goes on over there. I think someone that I know who's older, right? Yeah, from like older generation saw that Psy, and it was like, what the hell is this? This is disgusting. This is weird. I like, what is this? So
right.
Like here, like he was still like, I feel like he was still in the Korea from the 50s or 60s, right? So not that that's good or bad, but I just feel like, have you maybe seen this phenomenon, or is that something that you also think happens? Or
well, it takes place at multiple levels, and both on the left and the right. I personally, I think Psy and the current K-pop has been, it has great cultural power to it, but it has also been degraded. It's become basically run by multinational corporations for profit. And that in the 70s and 80s, you had a lot more, over through the 90s, local bands throughout Korea recording for local market. They used to address real political issues, and there was a lot of solidarity with workers in the garment industry, for example, low-paid workers. They wrote songs about contemporary issues. A lot of college students in the 80s and 90s. I remember when I came to study in Korea first in 1995, and there were student protests all the time, not just against the government, but also against the oppression of workers. It's the solidarity. It was, now in retrospect, it really is very impressive what Korea was able to do. And Korea still has something of that tradition of activism, revolutionary thought, but it's weakened. It's starting all over again, you might say, a whole new generation of people. And I'd be happy to maybe introduce you to some of the people. We can do an interview, maybe, for example, Chae Sun-yeon, who was the leader in the International Revolutionist Party. Doesn't speak any English, but I'd be happy to translate if you want to do a show and have some access to some of the activists in Korea now who are doing some really good work.
that would be amazing. I would really appreciate that. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
So let's get to some of the questions that I actually had for you. I'm so excited to actually learn. Right, I really have had as much of a connection to Korea as you have had, especially considering that you've actually been there and all this other thing. So one thing that I have, there's actually another video where actually it's called the Korea reunification video or something like that. And I talked to Korean in the video, and then he says that I say the Korean government is actually a puppet of the United States.
Right.
Now, he's not the only person that has said that, right? He agreed with that. I feel like there's a very common sentiment amongst Koreans that I've talked to, which isn't really put out there by the media. What about you? Like, what about in Korea? How do people feel over there? Do they also say this as well? That the South Korean government is a puppet of the United States? Or is this, I don't know. I don't know about the Koreans I'm with here. Go ahead.
as an American, someone who's been active in the United States politically as well, it seems a little bit more complicated because we Americans also feel like our government is the puppet of all sorts of forces behind the scenes. So it's perhaps a little bit overly simplistic to say that the Korean government is just a puppet of the United States, because that United States itself is not really the United States. It represents a small elite. Uh, but it is true in that all sorts of decisions are made in government about policies at a high level without any democratic participation. And this special sort of US Korea alliance military creates this sort of unaccountable space in Korean society. Military bases, classified operations, enormous military budgets that allow the powerful to shuffle around money, claim ownership of things they don't own, and so it's abused by elites. Those elites are both Korean and American, and of course they include Japanese and others as well. But it has been extremely damaging for Korea in terms of sovereignty, control of people over their own land, military bases of the United States in Korea. Actually, my Japanese friends say that Korea is better than Japan, that in Japan, citizens have even less rights to see what pollution, what dangerous chemicals US bases are dumping in the water, less rights to protest against these dangerous flights or the noise pollution or other consequences of the military bases. So Korea is a little bit better in some respects than, say, Japan or Guam. But and this extends to Hawaii too, right? Or extends all over. We have this basically this sort of invisible empire. So
Okay.
I
So
sympathize with the position of those Koreans who say that, but I would say it's a little bit more complicated because the United States itself has been colonized by these powers.
okay, if we look after World War II, the
Mm-hmm.
Cold War, the thing is that Korea and Israel slash Palestine were actually on the world's hotspots for potential war for a
Right.
long time. They were the world leaders about like where World War III could potentially start. I think that for some reason Korea has been lowered on that list more recently, but for a long time it was at the top. Now, if you
Right.
take a look at their issues of both having after World War II, having other countries come in and start to dominate them or start to influence the leadership in those countries, um, why don't you have the Koreans? How do the Koreans feel about the whole Israel-Palestine situation? Are they taking sides, or just
Right.
from what you
Right.
know? Okay.
Well, it's complicated in
And
the
wait,
Korean
is the
case.
power and the charge different from the people? Right? Yeah. Like you can also tell that. Yeah.
Oh, well, so Korea is a little bit different in that it has a large Christian population. Only Philippines and Korea are the only two countries that have a large Korean Christian population. A lot of the Christians in South Korea are people from Pyongyang, from the sort of far right, who came down, and they took a very strong, I would say, uh, not particularly open, pro-American, pro-Christian, and now pro-Israel. So there were protesters, conservative protesters in Seoul who would show up waving Korean, American, and Israeli flags and saying that our Christianity requires us to support Israel, etc. And so there's been a lot of that in the conservative Korean groups. There are, however, some Christian groups in Korea who take the opposite position, who are pro labor, pro environment, and who challenge the government and the current corrupt system that's in power. I'm not in Korea. I'm not in Korea right now, so I don't know how much protest is going on in terms of regarding Gaza or how accurate the
So
description
I'm sorry,
is
just to make
going.
just to clarify, just so you're
Please.
saying that the Koreans don't really make a parallel between these situations. They just kind
Oh,
of like go
between the
on these kinds of
division,
ideological
I
guidelines.
haven't
Okay.
seen that described in I haven't seen that comparison. I'm not saying there may be people who
Okay.
are saying that, but that's not the common comparison made. It's a legitimate
Interesting.
comparison to make.
Yeah, I wonder why they never teamed up. Right? It was just interesting. I thought they would be
Well,
natural.
we have this issue in the United States too. I mean, so there are three. It's the issue of walls, right? So you have the wall between the occupied territories in Israel, the wall between the United States and Mexico, and of course the wall between North and South Korea. And these walls are a way of sort of imposing corporate state power over the people, and they are increasingly related. There's a book out about the nation of borders, I think it's called, about how the United States Border Patrol and the technology employed is increasingly the same firms that are doing the occupation in Israel. Same technology is being used, same players are involved. And I haven't done research on the DMZ in Korea, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's the same people involved in the border between North and South Korea. But there's a lot of money to be made in creating borders and maintaining them, and it's becoming an industry around the world. And it's extended into our cities, right? We're having divisions put up all over the place. The DMZ itself has become radicalized over the last 20 years. And so it used to be possible to go back and forth. There used to be boats that allowed you to go to North Korea from Japan. There was common meetings between families that were organized, and we were moving in a positive direction, say, until 2000. Well, in some ways till 2001, but certainly until 2004. And now it's becoming more and more strict. And the restrictions, essentially, there's no way to communicate with people in North Korea. They're demonized. It's being used as a way to create a distance and to separate people in a really tragic way. And it's not really justified. In fact,
Okay.
it's an industry.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that the overall sentiment of Koreans regarding the United States is improving? Well, okay. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just finish the last question. Okay, so
Please.
it seemed like you were kind of like addressing more of like the larger like population at hand, but I had also asked about the official position. So
Right.
right now, I do think that the conservative Koreans are kind of more in power. That might suggest that there might be more of an official stance towards supporting Israel. What is the official state position of Korea regarding, like, have they been sending aid to like one side or the other? Have they put out any statements
regarding
regarding the
Palestine?
Israel-Palestine situation that's going on now?
So I'm not following the day-to-day pronouncements by the Yoon administration regarding Israel.
Sure,
My
but you know the
guess
general,
is,
yeah,
my understanding is that compared with Japan, for example, that the Yoon administration has tried to show that it's even closer to the Biden administration than Japan is, even a better ally. And this has been their sort of political strategy, is that previously Korea was ignored, was they would go to Japan, U.S. would go to Japan and ignored Korea. And now Korea, the Yoon administration sort of boasting, now Korea is even more important than Japan, because Japan was more hesitant about jumping into supporting the Gaza war, the destruction, and Korea was more forthgoing. And so there were a lot of Korean Americans, especially in what you might say mainstream Democrat Republicans, who were
yeah,
like saying, "Oh, now Korea is an even better ally for the United States." But for me, it's very disappointing, because I was impressed previously in the administrations of Nomuhyun and to some degree in the Park Geun-hye administration as well, that these two administrations were willing to stand up and articulate a different vision than the United States, and that was a positive. To have an administration which is basically doing whatever whatever comes over from Washington, they give a rubber stamp to, has been a tremendous step backwards for Korea.
I understand. Okay, that's it's good to know. Yeah. Now the thing is that the U.S. may have interests right in the region, right? They have certain things that they want to get done. They want to keep their bases there, and they want to, sometimes lobby to get those things paid for, through other means, which is, those controversial. But to what extent do you think that the U.S. is engaged in, maybe, trying to manage public opinion over in Korea? I mean, that's almost like manipulating of the public narrative. I think they definitely do that over here.
Right.
Also, here's I do feel like Sky Australia, right? When the Dominion machines came out, they had a newscast I saw on their thing about how weird all this stuff was. Then later on, like about a couple months later, they were just making a lot of newscasts supporting Pete Buttigieg, who was actually implicated in that whole Dominion thing. So it was very strange to see them go about face. What about the whole do you ever see like this type of like weird stuff going on with Korean news?
Well, so Korean news, I mean, it's a global issue, right? The manipulation of information, consolidation of the control of media, and it really has to do with the way in which media concerns have been bought up by basically banks and multinational corporations, and that's true about Korea as well. I think there are some local reporters, people like yourself in Korea, who do good work. But the quality of reporting in, say, Chungang-ilbo or Chosun-ilbo has gone down steadily in quality. I subscribed to Chungang-ilbo for, I think, 8 years, and it went from being reasonable to being only the opinion pieces were worth reading, to being even the opinion pieces were sort of junky. I felt like I was being force-fed the corporate positions in all of them. So the quality of media declined tremendously in Korea. It's really tragic. And the same thing is true in the United States. Reporting about Korea is so biased. There's more reporting about Korea. There's more about like K-pop, but K-pop is not Korea, and the K-pop that they report on is extremely limited. So if you have somebody out there in Korea who's writing, for example, Shin Zeno, for example, who writes very critical, thoughtful music about what's happening in Korea today.
If I could just jump in for a second, right? Yeah. Yes. Actually, I could show you what's interesting if you want. I could show you on the screen. Actually, maybe I'll just do that right now. I wonder if I still have that. The thing is that, right, a lot of Koreans, just so you know the people, they're quite a conservative people, correct? Naturally.
I don't know if I want to say that.
Okay, maybe it's more here in the United States, just because of like that.
So you're seeing
cultural lock.
But
the thing is that on the latest thing for the Korean Association, the annual news report about their latest thing, yeah, they had the everybody but the K-pop performance was featured in the newsletter. Maybe because they don't want the little kids reading the sexy outfits or something like that, right? But
right.
Out of all the acts that came on the recent event, right, you saw the traditional dresses and stuff, the drums, right? Yeah, the picture taken, right? In the newsletter, you did not see any pictures. They mentioned the K-pop, they did not show any pictures. So, I guess, could you see that happening in like Korean society? You get what I'm saying? Like conservative that way? They don't really want to put the pictures like that in the more serious.
Oh, well, certainly, I mean, there's an image, there's a conservative view. I don't know if conservative is the right word, but how they want Korea to be seen abroad. And there's an enormous amount of effort made by corporations and government to manage the image of Korea. And so the image of Korea is that they worked very hard under Park Chung-hee, they modernized, and now they have even more advanced technology, even better cars in Korea because of this Korean miracle, because of this sort of spirit and determination of the Korean people. But it, of course, erases much of the history of what actually happened in Korea, and it dismisses all the people who worked, in the democracy movement and the labor movement and the environmental movement, who are working today. Because most of the really impressive changes in Korea did not come from multinational conglomerates, but from the efforts of citizens groups.
Yeah, this is the newsletter that I was talking about, and you can see they featured the people in the tent serving the food. They featured the drums, the traditional dance, the taekwondo, right? Everybody got featured except for the K-pop performers. They
Interesting.
didn't even make the pictures. Yeah, and it was interesting
Right.
because they wanted the highlights. So interesting.
I
That
well,
was fun.
I don't know about that specific case, but I
It's all
have
good.
seen it consistently that the who is going to represent Korea is very carefully choreographed, and there are whole groups which are blocked out, so you wouldn't even know they existed. Um,
Okay, I really
yeah, and
appreciate your
I'd be
insight on that.
happy
Yeah.
at a later date to introduce you some of the people. Maybe you
Oh
could
yeah,
do
I
an
can't wait.
interview.
I can't wait.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do the
Okay,
translation for you,
that'd be
and
great.
we'll
Thank you.
do a program with Chae Sun-yeon.
Have you ever heard of someone named, I think probably one of the most high profile Korean Americans in the United States today is this lady named Yeonmi Park. Have you ever heard of her?
Well, yes, I have, and I believe I think maybe I was connected with her in Facebook. Maybe it was not in LinkedIn, but I haven't. I don't know her well,
Okay.
and I mean the North Korea South Korea issue. I'd be happy to talk about, but it's extremely sensitive topic these days, and people have a lot of trouble addressing some of the basic issues involved.
Well, okay, here's
And
actually something quite I've been
please,
wondering quite a lot about, right? Yeah.
please.
How does we know that Trump actually was one of the first presidents to actually make a go to North Korea. He's got quite a bit of pictures with Kim Jong Un, whatever. Um,
Well, he
how
stepped
do
over the DMZ, correct?
how do you think how do Koreans feel about Trump? I don't really know. I don't trust the news
Uh,
here either. So,
well, I
right, you were over there. What do they think about Trump?
right. Well, at the time, I think it was a mixed bag. On the one side, Trump was uh, sort of ugly American, right? Making all these demands. Korea had to pay for all the military expenses, all these things at the bases, even things Koreans didn't even want. Most Koreans didn't want, and Trump wanted them to pay for everything. And it's like, if you don't pay, we're going to leave you out, and we're going to stop letting you sell any of your products in the U.S., et cetera. Some of it was bluster, but some of it was real. He's basically sort of a gangster style politician. And so that was not very popular, obviously. Some of the things Trump said, I think, were potentially good, right? The idea of the United States pulling its bases out of all these countries around the world would be good for the U.S. and good for the countries that we have bases in. So I I don't disagree with some parts of it. Uh, at the same time, he was open to talking to North Korea, to Kim Jong Un. I mean, it was sort of a clown show. It wasn't serious sort of diplomacy and real policy shifts, but he was at least willing to meet with him as a sort of a sort of pro wrestling bizarro show. And that some Koreans had some hope that this would create some momentum going forward that might lead to some scaling down of tensions, some new openings for possibilities. And there really was some hope that Trump would lead the United States away from, and this actually includes people in the United States, people in State Department who felt that maybe Trump offered some sort of potential. What we learned, of course, was that it was a show for Trump. Trump was willing to go Singapore, Vietnam, jump over the DMZ for a couple minutes for a little PR, but the follow through of going to the next step and actually doing things was not of any interest to Donald Trump.
Very interesting. Yeah. So, if do you think that most Koreans would support Trump or Biden in this election? Like now from Korea.
Interesting question. I think often, so Koreans looking at America from Korea would probably say, let's keep things flowing, as they are. Biden would probably seem more predictable in the same way that Clinton seemed more predictable before, and at least we know what we're dealing with. And a lot of Koreans are still bought into this accepted sort of hierarchy, right? That even as the United States is decaying and falling apart, they have relatives in the U.S. They hope they can send their kids to Harvard or whatever. They feel that somehow the United States has this legitimacy that it's losing. I mean, at home you're aware that things are not what they used to be, but in Korea it's still held up as sort of like a model. for what things could be. And the media, of course, promotes all these American experts all over the place so that the mainstream Democratic Biden administration type people come across to most Koreans, not necessarily activists, but most Koreans as being at least a little bit more stable, a little bit more predictable. At the same time, I think Koreans are aware that there is something profoundly wrong with the United States. And Gaza is among those issues where it's sort of like being driven home that there's America, there's something seriously wrong. We don't really know what to do about it, but there's something seriously wrong with the United States.
I really appreciate your insight on these matters. Just being removed from
Yeah.
Korea itself, I always wonder how people over there are actually thinking. Yeah. So, okay,
Well,
cool. So, go ahead.
on the North Korea, maybe we can talk about North South Korea. I'm curious what if you
Well,
had
recently,
any.
actually, Kim Jong Un, he actually said that he's against reunification now.
Right, right,
This is actually a very significant change. And also, when we look at the things going on with Ukraine and
right,
Russia, the things
and
going on
Russia.
with Israel and Palestine, a lot of other countries may see an opportunity when the United States is doing this and busy on so
For
many
sure.
fronts to somehow, push the issue. And so I think that things are really kind of, what do you think's going on with that whole situation there?
Right. Well, I think it's extremely complicated and hard to understand on the issue of the Kim Jong Un statements about unification. Uh, I, I want to be very blunt about it. I may be a little bit offensive to some people who want to be on the safe side, but I think that the time has come for some truth telling regarding North Korea. So, what Kim Jong Un said in terms of opposition to unification and maybe even treating South Korea as an enemy nation, etc., it goes against basically all the fundamental teachings of his grandfather and his father, especially Kim Il Sung's statements. It's so radical a statement that it almost doesn't make sense in terms of his own legitimacy. So, my feeling and the feeling of others in Korea is that the current administration in North Korea is increasingly turning into a sort of a bad guy puppet and that it's being used by the United States, the West, military-industrial complex, etc., to drive this militarization and the creation of military economy. And that what he said is so totally out of context, out of any sort of ideological context in North Korea. It seems more likely that he was just bribed to say something controversial to get through some contracts for missile defense, for buying F-35s, for militarizing the Korean economy and the American economy and creating threats where threats don't have to be. And in that respect, I think we're moving towards the Ukraine model, sadly, in which North Korea and South Korea are being sort of puppets jerked around to increase military spending, increase conflict, destroy civil society, and increasingly under the Yoon administration, journalists are being imprisoned, activists are being locked up, public protests are limited, and it's getting more and more. It's going backwards to the sort of 1960s, 1970s style government.
Okay. One thing that I believe that was talked about back during the Trump era was they tried to convince North Korea to go on the Libyan model.
Yes.
Okay. You have any particular thoughts about that?
Well, I think it was a joke from the beginning that the Libyan model is like, the we kill you model, right? So
Pretty much, yeah.
I
I was
think
like, Gaddafi
so.
and dead. This is not really appealing plan, but okay.
So I think when they said the Libyan model, that the idea, say in these high level people in corporations and State Department, whatever, that it's sort of like signaling, right?
Would you see that
So
this was and it was read by this way by the Korean public at large? Would you say?
So I think that 80% of the people probably don't know what the hell that means, but that all the people in North Korea making policy and all the people of any sort of decisive role in government or academics in South Korea, they all knew what that meant. That meant destroy the North Korean regime. But I think what I was trying to say a moment ago is that there's a fundamental shift that took place. That the previous model was, we're going to destroy North Korea, just flatten it like Gaza out, and develop it and absorb it into South Korea. And that the new model is, we're going to take over North Korea and we're going to control it as our own boogeyman and use it to drive the militarization of Japan, Korea, and other countries, because we can make even more money that way. And so that what's being said from North Korea now doesn't really represent the ideological tradition from Kim Il Sung, doesn't represent the sentiment in the street. It really seems to be, almost, made for military contractors to drive this sort of insane. And I feel, when I talk to people in South Korea, that they're starting to sense that it's just too weird. It's just too clown-like what's going on in North Korea. It just doesn't fit.
I don't really believe anything coming over from, because I just feel like so much of the information from a young age. I think that's also something that gets missed a lot in the the anti-war rallies. Just we all could hear from Koreans or Korean Americans who were very skeptical of how North Korea and South Korea was portrayed, because a lot of it wasn't actually repeated. I grew up as a young kid seeing Koreans carry the signs "Yankee Go Home," and immediately that alerted me that there was something different between what I was seeing on TV and other conversations that were happening. So,
well, it's a very tragic story. I mean, the American-Korean relationship, and as an American who worked in Korea for many years and was and taught American university, obviously I think there's much positive that took place between Americans and Koreans, and of course many Korean Americans, extremely valuable positive aspects of the relationship. But at the same time, I think we have to recognize what really happened. And a lot of Koreans are very aware of this. The number one is that at the end of the war, Germany was divided, right? In the case of East Asia, right? Japan was not divided, but Korea was divided. This was not an accident. And then in the next stage, Lee Seung-man came back.
It kind of was in a little bit, though. Do you know the story? You know the story, right?
Tell me. Well,
they didn't really need Korea. They had Japan, but they decided, like, I'll ask for half anyways, and then they got. So it was kind of a little bit of an accident. It wasn't really like they were okay with losing it, right? Yeah.
Okay.
They just threw it out there. They got it.
Total accident. But it
was a total accident. But it was so casual, though. You know what I mean?
Well,
it really, yeah.
Many Koreans, intellectuals at the time and today, are very aware of what this meant. That Korea was not central in the picture, and this is still true. That there's been a tendency to look at Korea. It's gotten better. It's gotten better, but there was a sort of flyover Korea attitude.
So if you think that he's going against like what they're making making it split, do you think that this actually means that reunification is really going to be significantly more difficult to make happen? Do you think there's any way to save it? Do you think there's a way to save reunification?
So I'm a big advocate of unification. I think it's the only way forward. It's the only way to resolve all these contradictions. But unification has to be led by citizens, right? And I really find it offensive, these people who sort of assume that North Koreans are all brainwashed. They can't think for themselves. They can't run anything, right? They've all been under a dictatorship for so long. This is sort of a discrimination. I met North Koreans in South Korea and in Japan. They're thoughtful people. They know what they're talking about. They're as capable as being citizens as South Koreans, maybe more so. And North Korea is a government I don't support. It's very repressive. But there are some positive things about North Korea. People are not addicted to cell phones. They're not watching pornography all the time. They actually read books. They have a healthier relationship with their families. I mean, there are lots of things in North Korea that are not all negative. What's really tragic is that unification, which could be this tremendous opportunity to build a new country, has been skewed. And so unification is talked about in the South as being, Samsung and Hyundai are going to build apartment buildings, highways, malls, introduce basically the nightmare, which is now South Korean society, to North Korea. And a lot of the efforts in North Korea in terms of Kaesung and labor was it was clear what the writing on the wall was, that the argument being made by the government and in the media was, we will use cheap labor in North Korea and this will help us to be competitively internationally. But what that really means is that corporations are going to go to North Korea, use their cheap labor, and then use that to destroy labor in the South. In the same way the United States, they went into Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee with these, no union relations, and then use that to destroy labor, and then go back north and destroy labor in the north. The reverse in the case of the United States. So it's extremely negative. Almost none of the description about reunification says, we're going to create a democracy. We're going to have people participate. It's all like Samsung, Hyundai, these organizations, which are, multinational corporations,
I really
are going
appreciate
to
it.
run North Korea.
Yeah, that was actually very insightful. I really appreciate that. It's giving me lots of
Well, so
digestion.
Samsung and Hyundai are not Korean companies, right? Many of the stockholders are in Saudi Arabia, around the world, right? They run for international profit, and I think it's a total mistake to assume that Samsung or Hyundai's interests are the same as the Korean people's interests.
I like that, man. There's a lot of truth in that. Yeah, interesting. All right, cool. So right now the Korean people are supposedly going under some kind of population crisis where they're not
Yeah,
having the babies, and supposedly it's going to kill off more of them than the Black Plague. They're
right.
supposed to have a really, some people even say it may be the end of the Korean people as we know it. What's maybe North Korea could, I don't know if that's also happening. What's going on with the crisis, anyways? What do you think caused it? And how do you think that Koreans can get themselves out of this thing?
Right. Well, it was caused by creating a totally inhuman environment in South Korea, in which people are working all the time. They're paid poorly, and the cost for housing, for food, everything keeps going up without any control, and in which they're forced through the media and through all sorts of advertising to assume that they have to spend all this money in this consumer culture in order
I
to
think
be.
Koreans also have a
Yeah,
naturally competitive spirit that really
yeah,
drives them to kind
yeah.
of like outdo each other in a destructive way, maybe.
For better or worse, but they're really, a lot of Koreans spend a lot of money sort of keeping up with the Joneses unnecessarily, and that culture has been promoted. All the advertising on TV, the TV shows, everything from a young age is showing you got to compete, you got to like sacrifice yourself for your social status, and at the same time, you know, opportunities for public housing, for public education, for daycare for children, etc., has gotten incredibly expensive. Working people can't afford to have children.
Yep.
Most people
I do have a
assume.
question about that. Now, the thing is that for education, we know that Korea has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Supposedly, this is a
Right,
good thing, right? Yeah. But then
right,
also, we see that the education system in Korea is actually having some big problems right now. They actually illegalize home tutoring in Korea,
right.
correct? So,
Uh,
seems
well,
us
home
odd. Like maybe you can help like explain what's going on with that.
Well, it's confusing and not so easy to understand, and I don't claim to be an expert on it. But one of the issues has been that public education in Korea used to be reasonably good in the 1960s and 70s, and it was reasonably good, I think, because they were competing with North Korea, and they had to show that they were more egalitarian and more democratic in order to keep their legitimacy. So even though the Park Chung-hee administration was very repressive, there were certain aspects like education in which it was relatively good. And over time, what's happened is education has become more and more elitist. In the old days, in the 1970s, if you came from a little village in the countryside, you studied really hard, you could get into the Seoul National University, right? Today, it's because the tests were they tested you on your level of education and your creativity, your ability to understand questions, and so smart, thoughtful people could get in to good universities. The whole education system has changed now, so the tests are basically how you learn the skills of answering these stupid questions as fast as possible. And the way you do that is not by being smart, it's by being trained at what's called hagwons, these private academies, and those you have to pay a lot of money for. So in the new system, if you're from a rich family and they send you to these schools and you learn the tricks, even if you're not that good as a student, you can pass the test and get in. And so the whole system has been set up. So really, if you come from a poor family, it's now impossible to go to a good school. And they're all packed full of extremely rich kids. There was a TV show called Sky Castle, which describes this whole process. I wrote an article about it a while ago, but it's really has become anti-educational.
Yeah, we have a culture that loves education as much as Koreans. It's interesting to see that. I'm glad that you have experience with that system, because it's interesting.
Well, my kids were in Korean school, so I saw it, up close.
So yeah, so like when the thing is that people talk about redesigning the educational system here, a lot of times they'll talk about like duplicating certain results in other countries such as Korea,
Right.
but they don't really
Right.
look at the costs, or they don't really look at the whole picture. They just take the parts they want and use
Right.
that to justify whatever they're making up. And I see this used a lot for a lot of stuff relating Korea, right? People just grab this and slap it on, right? Yeah, or they discover something from Korea and then they release the product, right? Yeah, with some other changes.
Well, in some ways, I mean, like Obama talking about Korea, he's getting the wrong part. So the test scores was the wrong part. The part that's good about Korea is that education is not tied to real estate taxes, and so the general level of education available in Korea is much higher than it is in the United States for working people. Working people have basic minimum education guaranteed. Whereas in the United States, if you live in some place in Alabama or rural Virginia or in some public housing areas, there's no money for your education. Your school is falling apart. You have to, educate your kids yourself. And that's because there's no standard. It's all based upon the ability. I mean, this idea of linking real estate to education, where like the more inflated your house value is, the better your public education would be, is just criminal. And Korea doesn't do that. So Korea is much better in that respect.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. All right. So hopefully some things they could work it out, right? And other things.
Yeah, well, I mean,
right
I encourage the dialogue between real Korean citizens and real American citizens. We have a lot to learn from each other. Korea has Korea has a tremendous tradition. The emphasis on education, on respect and care for family and community. There's a lot about traditional Korea which has tremendous value. What's sad is that recently Koreans have been both seduced by this idea that Korea is going to be an advanced country by introducing, smartphones and facial recognition technology and no money, moneyless systems, and they've bought into this without questioning it, because technology has been so promoted. This is true in China as well. That this sort of promotion of technology is like a way to save us, or show somehow we're even more advanced than the Westerners because now we use facial recognition for everything and we don't have to use cash anymore.
Yeah.
without an awareness of how dangerous that is.
One thing that I feel is strange is there's the BRICS thing. The
Hmm.
what is it? All these countries, Brazil, like Russia, India, China,
Right,
right? Yeah.
right.
Supposedly, I
South
think
Africa.
it's China has like a big leading role in BRICS. And the thing is that I would think that North Korea, for their and undergoing sanctions and stuff, would really jump at a chance to join something like BRICS. But for some reason, BRICS has South Korea, and North Korea is not a part of it. I asked actually Dermot Hudson, who's part of Korean Friendship Association. He said something about Korea just doesn't agree. DPRK doesn't really enter into like international agreements and stuff. That's the case. But it's just interesting to me. How do you read this? It just seems a little strange to me, right? Also, South Korea, they're trying to prove their loyalty to the United States by going with Israel, and then with BRICS, like what's going on? It's a little weird, right?
Right.
What do you think?
Very confusing. I mean, India, for that matter, also it plays both roles, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah, actually,
BRICS
you're
and also
exactly
doing
right. Yeah.
military exercises with Russia at the same time. It's like back.
Hmm.
I mean, it's extremely confusing, I would say. On
Yeah.
the
What is
case of
that?
North Korea, go ahead.
No, I agree. Like, no, I was just
So,
rhetorically
so
okay.
in the case of
Great.
North Korea has made a tremendous effort to uh, stay out of all sorts of agreements on currency, on trade, etc., globally. And To some degree, it's because they do things that other countries don't like. But to some degree, it's a choice that they've made. Uh, it's a mixed choice, it be positive and negative. Uh, I think that I don't want to defend the North Korean government. Let me first say categorically, an extremely repressive system, extremely destructive, and now extremely corrupt. And I think playing footsie with the United States to militarize the entire region, an extremely dangerous situation. That said, uh, I I'm sympathetic for countries who don't want to be part of the World Trade Organization or these currency swap systems, which allow multinational banks and corporations to take over your economy. And I think we can see around the world how negative the consequences of that are. So I'm sympathetic to those who don't want to participate in these. And I would say, go out on a limb and say that those who see BRICS as a solution, as an alternative, are being naive because uh, China, Russia, India, South Africa, Brazil are also run by these multinational banks and corporations. It may be a different group than those running the United States and Great Britain and Germany, but they are also very far away from the concerns of citizens. And we have to sort of step back and sort of assess the reality, which is that basically all the governments in the world have to some degree or another bought into these globalist alignments. And that the fact that you have a BRICS group and a NATO group, both of them are basically imperialist in their policies. They're both basically committed to an extractionist, growth oriented, consumption based economic model.
Okay. One thing that I'm very glad about your expertise in Seoul, right? You speak Chinese, you speak Korean, you speak Japanese. You've been in all of those countries as well, probably more even. So the thing is that there's a complex situation going on, right? China,
For
Taiwan,
sure.
right? There's that thing going on. Then you also have, like you said, Japan. People are pushing back about the lack of ability to speak out and fight back against intrusion of military bases that they're being asked to pay for on
Right.
their own soil. So, um, and potential of like we see the deterioration of North Korea, right, saying that they're gonna not seek reunification anymore. So,
Right.
what do you think is going to be the developing relationship or the future going forward with U.S. and Korea?
Right. Well, it's an extremely important issue and one that we need to talk about openly. Basically, right now there is no open discussion, no honest open discussion going on. You're given either this U.S. Korea alliance, sort of whole hog, no problems. It's great for both countries, or you get sort of a identity politics critique, which doesn't really address the real structural economic issues beneath the surface. And I think this really, I mean, we can blame the conservatives, the right, as much as we want, but the real cause of this has been a decline on the left in the United States and in Korea. And that has to do with what the critical reasoning that in Korea, for example, in the 1980s, in the 90s, you had a lot of professors who were trained in Marxist economics, a lot of students who were interested in anti-colonial movement readings, who really offered a comprehensive critique, not just to say the United States is being mean to us, but to say that this systems of, say, overproduction, consumption leads to war. I mean, this is the bottom line.
I have a quick question about that. I'm so sorry.
Please.
Yeah. So the thing is that one of the things that happened after the Vietnam War is that the the U.S. realized, or the U.S. military-industrial complex realized, that U.S. sentiment was they were losing the fight in the public because people were seeing the pictures of people suffering, and there was a TV show called MASH, right? Yeah, which was really didn't show the suffering much, but it was featuring it was about the war. People saw that it was impacting lives, people getting hurt and stuff like this, and there was real costs to it. Nowadays, all this has been kind of like they really silenced the pictures and all that stuff over here. What about in Korea? Now the thing is that maybe in Korea they show the pictures of the suffering still, or maybe they've also cut that off. I wasn't in Korea.
You mean Koreans suffering in? I wasn't sure. You mean
just like worldwide suffering, right? Like any now the thing is that nowadays all war pictures on the front are now much more controlled. And now the thing is that
100% accurate.
But Koreans, I think themselves are much more like just the ones I talked to here. Once again, a lot of them say that the Korean government is a puppet state, right? I think that you had a slightly. I don't know how the people Koreans over there think, but I think they're also much more.
Well, you can definitely find a lot of Koreans who feel that way, and so, I would include some very conservative Koreans, but the conservatives and Koreans can be split into two groups.
Like with the victims, right? They don't know what's going on in America, so they haven't seen the amount of repression of the suffering. But since they themselves have suffered, I don't think they would be as willing to, cancel the pictures of others suffering, or maybe they are.
Right.
It sounds like they are actually.
Well, I think many people are not aware of just how edited the information that they get is, and of course, a lot of this has to do with the American. I mean, what happened in 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, where the United States has imposed sort of a blanket sort of blackout on an enormous amount of information. And people in the United States take this for granted, right? They don't even question it. No American. I mean, I'll be the first American.
No, everybody knows it's wrong. They just don't want to do anything about it.
Well, I'll give two examples.
They all know it's wrong.
I'll give two examples. I have never seen a report talking about prostitution run by American military in Iraq or Afghanistan. I've never seen it. You don't think they're doing that? I haven't seen a report about an American POW held in Iraq, Afghanistan, or else. You think we fought a war for 20 years and no one was taken as a prisoner of war? Give me a fucking break. So we're being lied to about these foreign wars by the United States on a massive scale, unbelievably massive scale.
How bad is that going on in Korea? It's the same amount, maybe a little less.
Let's say one more thing about this. So the United States, they say 7,000 Americans were killed in these foreign wars in 25 years. Are you fucking crazy? It was more like 70,000. They've lied at an enormous scale. And so this creates a culture of lies, and that affects Korea. And Koreans are so dependent on the United States, sadly, over recent years. So many people study in the United States. It's become so important in Korea that it's very, very painful. It's like it's painful for me because my status, like a lot of Koreans, is based on my American roots. So for me to admit that America is decaying in this profound way is so painful that it's easier to just play stupid and just pretend everything is okay.
Korea's going down too.
And sadly, that's the case. And there is reason to believe with this whole COVID-19 operation that North Korea is going to come out ahead, because at least they didn't do the craziness, with the vaccines and the globalization of medicine. So, North Korean medicine is so much worse than South Korean medicine, but it was not run for profit and it was not run by multinational corporations. And so that actually might be a saving. I mean, I don't know what the future is going to be, but it might be a saving grace, because what's happening in Korea, where now you can't go in a hospital unless you're wearing a mask, in which they're subjecting all these kids to all these vaccine regimes, in which medicine is for profit. They're trying to make money off of cancer. I mean, it's just grotesque what's going on in South Korea. And I really feel that we should stand with the Korean people, South Korea, North Korea, Korean Americans, and demand that they all have a right to have a decent life and not to have multinational corporations, American or Korean, it doesn't really matter, who are exploiting them for the benefit of their stockholders. And their stockholders are trusts, which are basically extremely rich people around the world who could care less about working people in Korea.
Do you think there's going to be, what are the ramifications of the of Kim Jong Un saying that he doesn't want reunification now?
Well, I think the immediate ramification is it's being used as an excuse to militarize the South Korean economy, to put more and more money into the military and say North Korea is a threat, and that we can't have meetings between families anymore. We can't show you on TV anything about North Korea except for that they're a threat. And this is related, sadly, to the Yoon administration. So Yoon Suk-yeol, the current president, who is a very unusual president, who got in there in a rather unusual way, is not very popular, is not very competent, and he has sort of staked his whole political existence, survival, on promoting conflict with North Korea. And this is similar. Lee Myung-bak, the president, was similar like that as well, although not as bad in terms of hyping up the North Korean threat. In the case of Lee Myung-bak, several people in South Korea, I can't confirm this, but I've heard it from people I trust, say that Lee Myung-bak had actually quite close ties with North Korea, and that a lot of the conflicts with North Korea were basically false flags cooked up to justify his political power, and that there's a lot of corruption on both sides. The solution to it would be for North Koreans and South Koreans to come together as citizens and say, enough of this. Korea should be for Korea, in the same way that America should be for America, for Americans. I hope we can have an alliance between Koreans and Americans, Koreans North and South, Americans North and South, for government of the people and by the people, for
like
the people.
That, yeah. Hey, I think that I really appreciate it. It's been really cathartic for me to have like these discussions to really find out more. It's been a blank area in my knowledge for a long time that I've always wanted to fill up. So thank you for giving me some more information on that. Really looking forward to the people you're going to refer my way. I think you have a book coming out. How does that book relate to these issues? And tell me a little bit more about that book.
My second book from the campaign is called The Bitter Tonic Known as Truth. And it's talking about basically how recognizing truth is a painful but necessary medicine for us to move on. It's not explicitly about Korea, but I wrote most of the speeches when I was in Korea, and Korean political philosophy deeply influenced me. I was deeply influenced by how Korean intellectuals from ancient times felt this deep commitment to political action. Korea has a very strong tradition in that respect, in some ways more impressive to me than China and Japan, which I also studied at length. And so I was very inspired. But basically, the idea in the great tradition Korea, what we call Sunbi, EONBY is that you get this education. You're privileged, like myself. I had a good education, good family education. And this is not something that you get, which is a privilege for you to abuse and enjoy, but it's a moral obligation to do your best for everybody else who didn't have that. And that sort of pure intellectual commitment that I saw in Korea was very inspiring to me. And that inspired my book, which should go on sale from next week. And I also want to say I have 7 books translated into, in Korean or translated into Korean. And I would be happy if there have any Korean Americans or Koreans out there who want to discuss with me. I'd be happy to talk about these issues and talk about them in Korean and what I've done working in Korean. I've worked with multiple political figures. I think you're not going to find any American politician who is that engaged in Korea, and both conservative and progressive. I didn't agree with all the politicians in the conservative or progressive side, but I certainly have been willing to talk to anybody as I am now.
Where can people pick up the book?
The Bitter Tonic will come out from BookBaby online next week, and you can order it probably through Amazon. Everyone else thereafter. I would love to publish it through a publisher in the United States other than the BookBaby, but the content is just too controversial for your average publisher. But I think you'll find it interesting. And basically, I'm saying that we have to start, like I was saying about our foreign wars and what's been blocked out in the United States, and for that matter in Korea, that this is really the way forward, is just to sort of say, this is where we are. This is where we are. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm personally responsible. I was part of the system. I grew up in a privileged family, but let's start speaking truth.
Actually, last question before I slide off, but
Please.
There's actually I saw a picture with you and the former president. I know you actually addressed the generals.
Yes.
How do you how much relationship do you ever get to talk with them about politics and stuff like that? You have really
right. So what happened with Park Geun-hye? She was a conservative politician, but she was going to visit the United States. I think I can't remember. It's like 2016, 2017. And so for the travel to the United States, she asked, I think, 6 Americans living in Korea for their opinion about what she should do. And I responded, I took it seriously. I mean, I met not her, but one of her, lower level people. And I wrote, 10 pages recommending in Korean what she should do, what not to do, what's going in America. And I think she appreciated the fact that I made the effort. And she asked my advice again on a few things. And then she said some very kind things about one of my books. And that led to a sort of informal relationship. So I wasn't meeting her.
Maybe now that she's not in office, maybe she could come on the program with us, and that would be really cool.
Well,
you think that could happen?
Nothing's impossible, but I do want to say one thing about her.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is that I felt that she was taken down for corruption, and the corruption which she was accused of was in part real, but a lot of the stuff that was said about her was fabricated at the time, and it was. I think it's pretty clear that it was a setup. That the United States was very unhappy with her, or the players in the United States, because she was too independent-minded. And she was starting to try and find ways to engage China and Russia and other countries that were not being controlled by the corporate powers in Washington and New York. And that is why she had to go. And if you look at why she was taken down and all these stories that she was with this shaman and this sort of crypto religion and all, it has all the markings of a sort of color revolutions type takedown. That said, I don't want to say that she was clean. A lot of the accusations about the political corruption were real, but the personal stuff that was said about her, she had orgies, she was working with shamans and doing all sorts of weird stuff.
I didn't know about that stuff. Okay.
It was all a lot of it was made up. A lot of it was made up. It was an
Interesting.
operation to take her down, and I thought that was
She still
unfair.
wants
However,
election.
yeah. Anyway, but
How much?
I don't mean to
Yeah.
defend her because she had a lot of serious problems as well as basically any politician in Korea does, or the
Did she have
U.S.
did she have a strong political background though? Did she come up through like a lot of other offices, or she just came out of nowhere?
Well, she had been in the House of in the National Assembly for a while, but
Interesting.
most people feel that she got in because of her father, Park Chung-hee, who was basically to whom Korea's miracle development was attributed. So
Mhm.
I don't want to rate her highly as an incredible visionary politician. She had a lot of problems as well, but I think the
She had a
she
lot of
was
access. She has a lot of knowledge. I would love
yeah.
to have her on the show.
I think she
Either
was
way,
more.
I want to
She
know.
was well. If we could have a discussion about this, like
Yeah.
what really happened, like not to say she's great or bad or whatever, just what happened, how she was taken down, and why. I think that would be very helpful for a lot of people. And of course, it's related to what happened to Nomi Hyun. I mean, it's just tragic. This whole process by which all these people were taken down, and Nomi Hyun was much more tragic, of course, in uh, what was done with him and Park Won-sen, the governor, the mayor of city of Seoul, who was the most promising politician in Korea and mysteriously committed suicide in a totally unbelievable way when he opposed COVID mandates in Seoul. I mean, there's a whole story which really, and I want to say this that the so-called progressives have not even started to touch what really happened in Korea over the last 20 years.
Okay. I, Anything's possible, right? Yeah. But I'm really
Absolutely.
so grateful for the things that you made available to me. Now, there's going to be some people out there who say, "Oh, look, this guy went to an Ivy League school. He's going to these international places. Maybe he's CIA, blah blah blah." Right? Yeah. What do you have
Right.
to say to people who might say something like that, or something
Right.
along those
Well, so
lines?
there are two levels of this. The one is, of course, my establishment background. So I put on a tie. I do that because I want to be who I am. I could put on a T-shirt, look like you. I would just be putting on a show. So I don't think that would be honest. So the establishment background is who I am. It has tremendous weaknesses to it, but it does have certain strengths in terms of my training. Knowing these languages, knowing the cultures, etc. And so, in that respect, I should be honest, and you should be honest with yourself about who you're working with. My argument to you, as if we're now talking as a voter, would be to say you're better off going with someone who's honest with you than going with someone who's posing as a progressive and who's actually engaged in some very dishonest activities. In terms of the specific, like me with State Department, CIA, sort of the how do you say American military industrial complex. This is a long story. It's not a secret. I've written about it extensively, so people know who I am and what I've done and what was done to me. But this is, of course, a total taboo subject in the United States. No one is allowed to discuss what was done to me. So I'd be
Well, I'm
happy
actually
to
like,
discuss
you
that.
could do another. You could talk about it if you want on this or another show.
Well, just so people know. So I lived in Korea from 2007 until 2019, and I was working for the Korean embassy from 2005 to 2007. I was working for the Korean embassy because the Korean embassy people were supportive of me. They gave me a job, but working in the Korean embassy means that I was denied employment in the United States. I was blackballed to the entire country, unable to do any work. And that had to do with our efforts, me and other, not just me, to try and address the criminal regime under the Bush administration, including 9/11 and the election, the Supreme Court ruling, and all sorts of other illegal activities that they engaged in at the time. And unfortunately, in after the Bush administration, you didn't get me as candidate, right? You got Barack Obama, who has basically made a deal with the devil to be the first African American president, if that's what he is. I'm not sure that's an accurate term, in return for not pursuing any of the illegal activities which took place before him.
So wait, you're saying
And
the Korean embassy came out with a position on 9/11?
oh no, this is not about, this is about Americans. So on the issue of Korea specifically, I was saying that I'm very grateful to the Korean people, because when I was not able to work in the United States anywhere, unemployed,
Oh,
they
because of your
gave me a
positions on 9/11,
they gave
then
me a
they,
job in the embassy,
okay,
in the culture center. Not
cool.
particularly well paid, but at least I had a job. I could feed my family. And so I was very grateful for that. And then after 2 years, I gave up. I couldn't find any employment in the United States. I had to go to Korea, which turned out to be great because I learned so much. I made so many friends in Korea,
So
and
the
I was
establishment has
impressed.
kind of turned its back on you.
Well,
So you're
so
not,
yeah,
yeah,
I'm,
but you have
what
the
they used to
background.
say about
That's, yeah.
FDR, I'm a traitor to my class. I'm a traitor to my class.
I'm not,
But I,
I'm not mad at the working with people like yourself, but I mean, it's okay to work together. Just don't replace us. You know what I mean? So that's
oh,
good.
I
We
totally
should work
agree.
together. We're stronger together. I'm happy
But
to work with you.
I
Yeah.
can I say one thing about CIA, because you brought that up, and I think it's an
I'm
important
sure
point.
people think they'll see George Washington University, they'll see
Well,
these
no, so
things that
it's an important
I get it.
issue.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So for me personally, my position would be this: I don't support, and it's in writing and in my staying, what the United States is doing, what the military industrial intelligence complex is doing. But I will say honestly, speaking honestly to you, everyone
Yeah.
watching, that if there weren't certain people in defense and in intelligence who stood up, I would be dead. So I feel grateful for those individuals who took a stand to try and keep at least some honest discourse. And if I didn't have their support, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. So this is a reality about the United States, and the reason why we have this terrible situation in which you have like whistleblowers and people in the military standing up is that there's such cowardice among citizens, that if we want a democratic society, if we want a transparent, honest society, then we have to be as brave as soldiers. We have to be willing to take that level of risk, because it's a war out there.
Appreciate that, man. You're not wrong at all. Yeah.
And
That's real
I
talk.
support your efforts, and I'll do my best. I want to be a candidate who responds, especially, I mean, Korean American, Asian American is extremely important. We see in the United States now on the left, there's this bias where the left will cover like the Middle East and South America, but nothing about Asia except for, a couple little bits about North Korea. Democracy Now! Is the perfect example of that. No serious reporting about Asia, but it's part of a I don't want to say conspiracy, but an effort to sort of pigeonhole that Asian Americans should be model minority in the sense of getting a job on Wall Street or making money in real estate or whatever, but they should not be model minority in terms of being politically committed to real revolutionary change. Because
Actually, I just talking about
please,
democracy now. I just
yes,
actually I just added a new video to my playlist made by Frontline from PBS. And the thing is that they completely portray the people in public housing as young black women, right, with
right,
children, right? Yeah. When there's many more different populations that live in public housing, they are typecasting 100%. They're selling
mhm,
you a story that you're familiar with for marketing reasons. Their
right,
ratings do matter to them. They're also, right, yeah, they're completely presenting, right, the white women as saviors, right, coming in. And you can see
right,
it all over their product. If you just take a
right.
close look, you're absolutely right, and thank you for addressing this. And Martin Luther King himself said, right, the white moderate is actually, in some ways, right, worse than the Ku Klux Klaner. And the
Well,
reason
this
why is because, right, in their self righteousness, they commit all the acts of atrocity, racism, right, yeah, delaying justice forever, right,
if I could
because,
just say something
yeah, go ahead.
very briefly at the end, and that is to say that the effort now to sort of demonize China, that a lot of people, Asian Americans, are making a serious mistake. They're thinking Japan or Korea as an ally of the United States. Attacks on China is like not our problem, right? But this is totally wrong, because beneath the demonization of China is a move to bring back the yellow peril ideology of the 19th century. And that is that most of these, poorly educated Americans can't tell the difference between Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese. So the attacks on Chinese are going to be used against Koreans, Japanese, Filipinos, and other Cambodians, Vietnamese in the future. So we really have to make sure that we are clear about issues of class as opposed to issues of culture and race, because they are, I guarantee you, that the ultimate plan is to demonize Asians.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah, I really do so much. So I think this was a really good episode. Once again, Emanuel Pastreich, you could look him up. He's got a website. He's actually running for president. Yeah, hit us up and watch some more in the series. There's going to be other things I'm sure are going to come up. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to hit end stream.